A mad scramble for scarce COVID vaccines as many countries still struggle to control the pandemic. Vaccine inequality persists despite the fact that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Earlier, I talked to Leslie Maasdorp, the Vice President of the BRICS New Development Bank. He shared with me how multilateral lenders are working to solve the vaccine distribution problems. Leslie Maasdorp, what a pleasure to see you once again, and welcome back to China.
Thank you very much.
As for a long time. Is the New Development Bank providing any support to your member countries on the vaccination?
Absolutely. So we have, as I mentioned, have put in place a $10 billion COVID response program. We are not directly financing the vaccination program, but the governments are able to direct resources towards vaccination because we have freed up other resources to support the public healthcare system, economic recovery loans, because it's the same pot of money, if you like.
Exactly.
So we have played a significant role. We've provided $2 billion to China, to Russia, to India, to Brazil, $2 billion they didn't have before COVID.
But Leslie, as you may know, most of the emerging and developing countries, not to mention the least developing countries, are still having hard access to vaccinations.
Yeah.
Most of the vaccines now available and probably in the future stockpile will be in the developed countries. So how are developing countries and financial institutions representing them likely to solve that problem? I see a big long sigh you had earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, you just came back from your own country. You are facing that situation too. So tell me more about it.
Look, I mean, I'd say, and a lot of experts, saying that the COVID-19 presented such a unique opportunity for the world to respond in a coordinated fashion, firstly, in a multilateral fashion, and also recognize this vaccine as a global public good, which means that you cannot solve it in one place without solving it everywhere. And therefore, we should have had a much more coordinated effort for the research, for the production, and for the distribution of the vaccine. So this vaccine nationalism, as it is sometimes called now, of countries looking at solutions only through the lenses of their own people, is a very short-sighted approach.
But besides calling upon them, please change your style, change your approach. We are equal. If I'm not safe, you're not safe either. Exactly. Besides saying things like this, what else can be done? What can we do to make them really take actions toward what we hope they will go to?
I think that the global institutions that have been set up to provide multilateral solutions have to be reinforced and strengthened, whether it be the World Health Organization, whether it's the G20. And let me remind you, in 2008, the world faced a major global crisis, and it was the G20 which stepped forward and provided a coordinated set of strategies with central banks and governments acting in unison to solve that particular crisis. This time around, we did not have a similar coordinated global effort. So hopefully what this COVID crisis has done is revalidate the importance of these global institutions, because without them, each one on his own, is going to take us nowhere.
The New Development Bank is an entity involving all the emerging economies, and they each have equal share and equal responsibility. But now, with the prevention and control of the pandemic and the economic recovery situations in various economies so different from one another, is there still a common destiny? Shall we describe it as that?
I would say that the idea of BRICS have been cemented now, right? The emerging markets, we are in one boat, and we sing we swim or sink together. So let's look at the New Development Bank. We have played a very critical role in enabling our economies to go through, to manage the health crisis, and now on the path to economic recovery. We put in place last year, March, a $10 billion economic recovery package under called COVID response emergency loans. We provided $2 billion loans to each of the 5 BRICS countries. We are now in the final stages of completing a final loan of $1 billion to China to help with the economic recovery process. I guess what I'm saying is that the plight of these countries, of the emerging markets, we cannot solve our economic problems alone. It's all interconnected. The fiscal challenges that Brazil, that South Africa is facing today will not be resolved by those two countries alone. It will be resolved in this within this global context.
The China-US Anchorage talk, what is your take of the conclusion? What does it mean for a development banker like you?
I take a lot from the fact that there's been a recommitment by the United States under the President Biden administration to multilateralism, to re-engaging with the world. If you look at the recommitment to the Paris climate targets, if you look at the commitment towards carbon neutrality by 2060, something which China announced, there's a coincidence of interest in terms of the big picture global items. As we heard this from Henry Kissinger and from all of these luminaries who were involved in opening up dialogue in the early 70s, you have to look at the world through longer term lenses, right? So short term schisms, one should really look at that as sort of dramatic moments, if you like. But the long term trajectory is one of partnership, one of international collaboration, of looking for multilateral solutions to the problems facing the world today. I think one should sort of drill beneath the sort of headlines and look at what's underlying and there's a lot of forces of collaboration that is happening. So despite what you refer to as Alaska, there's huge collaboration on climate change and on sustainability between the United States and China, as there is between China and the European Union and the rest of the G20.
Climate change particularly now, many of the emerging economies are impacted by climate change, but now what is the way forward? What is going to be the financial approach, the financial way of encouraging measures against climate change?
The New Development Bank, together with all the other multilateral development banks, have put sustainability and climate finance at the center of our activities. I believe that 2021 is going to be a decisive year of change. As you know, we have the Glasgow COP26 in the UK happening later this year. And I think it is very likely that COP26 outcome is going to shift the financial sector globally on a sustainable path. I mentioned earlier on the harmonization of standards that is happening. Between the central banks, they're also looking at how can we green the financial systems. The regulators are also discussing what regulatory measures they can put in place to ensure that there's a combination of both market initiatives and regulation, if you like, carrot and stick, in order to green the financial system. So the financial sector have a very critical role to play to make this carbon neutrality objective of 2050 and 2060 realizable. Because what it effectively means, this 2050 target, is that there's a commitment to only emit as much carbon as what you're removing from the atmosphere. In order to do that, industrial processes have to change. Business models of companies have to change. So there's almost like an industrial revolution that will be underway over the next couple of decades. And the role of the banking sector is to finance and to enable that. So I believe that over the next number of years, this will be the main work of multilateral banks. We will go out of traditional financing towards almost directing all of our activities towards sustainable finance. Very interesting.
About the streamlining of the standards, right, and different systems, how hard is it? Tell me more about it.
I think that, for the private sector to invest more in infrastructure and to invest into the sustainable path, there needs to be very clear metrics, if you like. There needs to be very clear policy frameworks. You can't have multiple standards. Today, for example, you have, I think, close to 200 different environmental, social, and governance standards, because various countries, various stock exchanges, various regulators, they've all come up with standards. But now it's becoming too complex. It's becoming very difficult for an investor to know, if I invest in this project, what are the actual measures? How will that project contribute towards reducing carbon emissions, for example. So there are significant steps underway now within the financial services industry to synthesize these frameworks and to make it simpler, to fast-track the sustainability revolution.
And of course, the climate change issue, there's always different camps earlier, right? But there are still common interests of the emerging economies as to what green finance really means.
Yeah.
What do you think the priorities are for the emerging economies?
I think for the emerging economies, as you know, there's been this tension between the developed world and the responsibilities of the developed world, given the fact that the developed world have been the ones leading the industrial revolution over the last few hundred years, which means that they have been the bigger emitters in the world. So there's always been a question about what, because now you are almost constraining the industrialization path of, let's say, continents like Africa, that has not really gone through that process of, big manufacturing and steel and aluminium and so on. But I think there's a recognition we are all in this together. There's only one planet. So the idea that now it is the chance now of developing countries to kind of go through that brown industrialization path, it is not possible. So I think emerging markets in the main, and all of our countries, the BRICS countries, have committed themselves to the Paris climate targets. And I believe at COP26 later this year, there'll be new, fresh commitments that countries will make.
Yeah, but there has to be some kinds of blueprint and roadmap by the emerging economies to bring into the overall plate, right, of policy considerations that would address the interests of the emerging economies. Exactly what are those points?
For example, many countries have, South Africa, where I'm from, is an example, Brazil is another, face a major problem of economic dislocation and unemployment as a result of COVID-19. We cannot, for example, set in motion green policies which lead to, let's say, further destruction of jobs. We have to make sure that the new economic growth path that is more green and sustainable in character is also focused on people and is also focused on the problems of inequality. So as we look at the green and sustainable agenda, in parallel, at the same time, we have to address the issues of inequality in emerging markets. Some countries are facing unemployment rates. In South Africa, for example, of over 32% of people are not gainfully employed. So you can't talk about green revolution to those people. It's about having food to eat.
Exactly.
So it's important to combine these agendas.
And of course, that takes a strenuous effort.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But starts from step one, at least.
Yeah, and as I said earlier on, we have to look at the world through longer-term lenses. We're going through a pandemic now. Once the vaccination, once we are able to inoculate our populations and economies are back onto a more sustainable long-term growth path, I think we will be able to look at the world in a much more integrated fashion again. At the moment, it's very much us and them almost.
Leslie Maasdorp, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And welcome back to China.
Thank you.